A black teenager is handcuffed outside his own home, accused of breaking in, because he forgot his keys. As neighbors film silently, the officer ignores his ID, sneering, "You people always have an excuse." But when his mother arrives, she's wearing a police badge, and what she does next, no one saw coming. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sound of the buffing machine echoed down the marble hallways of Ivydale University, its rhythmic hum bouncing between the towering pillars and polished glass. It was 2:10 a.m. The campus slept. The only soul awake in the west wing of the science building was a man most students didn't know by name. Maurice Langston moved slowly down the corridor, pushing the buffer with practiced ease, his steps methodical, his presence nearly invisible. His janitor uniform bore the faint shine of sweat around the collar, and his hands, though hardened by years of labor, carried a quiet precision. Every night he cleaned the lecture halls, mopped the tiled floors, emptied trash bins filled with discarded brilliance, coffee-stained problem sets, lecture notes, forgotten models of quantum decay. He worked in silence, not because he preferred it, but because he had learned long ago that silence was safer. As a black man working at a predominantly white Ivy League school, he'd grown used to the passing glances, the awkward avoidance, the polite thank you laced with the sting of pity, or worse, the complete lack of acknowledgement, like he was part of the furniture. But Maurice had learned to thrive in the margins, in the storage closet behind Lecture Hall B12, the one nobody used anymore. He had built a sanctuary. Inside, the walls were lined not with supplies, but with tattered chalkboards, old whiteboards, and hundreds of sticky notes and yellowing paper sheets, filled with symbols, formulas, and diagrams no janitor should have known. Except Maurice wasn't just a janitor. By candlelight, between his shifts and on short breaks, he had solved equations that graduate students stumbled over. He had theorized particle behaviors no one else had considered. He'd constructed thought experiments that challenged fundamental models of time dilation, all without a single class at the university he cleaned. His journey hadn't been planned this way. Born in East Louis to a mother who cleaned houses and a father who worked in an auto plant until the layoffs hit, Maurice had always known two things. Racism wasn't an obstacle course. It was the course, and learning was the only form of escape. No one could touch, at least not entirely. He remembered being 10 years old, finding a physics textbook in a dumpster behind a public school that had replaced it. He carried that book like it was scripture. When he turned 13, he started visiting libraries on the rich side of town, absorbing knowledge in secret, always aware of the stares, the extra security checks, the subtle reminders that he didn't belong in those spaces. At 17, after scoring off the charts on a standardized test, he applied to universities across the country. One rejection letter after another arrived, some openly citing incomplete documentation or lack of extracurriculars, others simply silent. He knew better. The world didn't have room for black geniuses without pedigree. So he stopped asking for permission to learn. Years later, when he applied for a janitorial job at Ivydale, it wasn't desperation, it was strategy. He wanted to be near the books, the classrooms, the whiteboards, and nobody questioned the janitor. Tonight, after his shift began, he ducked into the old closet like always. He opened his notebook, flipping past pages of dense calculations until he found the equation that had been haunting him all week. A problem involving quantum entanglement and non-local reality. On the board he wrote in small focused strokes, chalk dust forming a haze in the weak yellow light. The mathematics unfolded like poetry. Every symbol was a beat, every solved term a crescendo. Time slipped. He didn't hear the footsteps. Professor Sebastian Klein was known for two things: his towering ego and his razor intellect. That night, irritated by an incomplete experiment in Lab 4C, he had stormed back to his office, walking through the West Wing to avoid the student union's late-night chatter. As he passed the old lecture hall, a faint glow caught his eye from underneath the door of the long-abandoned storage closet. He stopped. No one should have been in there. He cracked the door open quietly. At first he saw only a man's back, hunched over, writing. Then his eyes adjusted. The boards. The equations. The complexity. Klein didn't breathe. The handwriting was rough but consistent. The math impossible. He stepped closer, the creak of the floor giving him away. Maurice froze. He turned slowly. There was no fear in his eyes, just calm, and maybe a little sadness. Klein narrowed his gaze. What is all this? Maurice didn't answer. Not yet. He wiped his hands on a cloth and stepped aside. Klein moved closer, scanning the wall. He began reading, eyes darting across the variables and matrix logic. Then he stopped. One expression stood out. A modification of Bell's theorem. Klein's mouth parted slightly. This isn't just correct, he whispered. This is original. Maurice gave a tired nod. I've been working on that one a while. Klein turned to him fully now, disbelief tightening his face. Where did you get this from? I wrote it. You? He said the word like it didn't fit in his mouth. You're a janitor. Maurice's jaw clenched, but he didn't flinch. I am, and I wrote it. Klein looked at the paper in his hand again, then back at Maurice, as though trying to reconcile two realities. You're telling me you came up with these equations during your shifts? Maurice nodded again, this time more slowly. And before, and after, doesn't matter when. What matters is whether they're right. The professor took a step back. His thoughts raced. How was it possible? How could a man with no academic history, no published work, no credentials, someone who cleaned toilets, write something even he couldn't fully decipher? Maurice added, quietly, I'm not looking for trouble. I just want to understand the universe. That's all. But Klein wasn't listening anymore. His eyes returned to the boards, to the equations, to the possibilities. In that moment, 1,000 decisions spun in his mind. Publish this. Take credit. Frame it as a breakthrough from his lab. After all, who would believe it came from a janitor? Even if Maurice spoke out, who would take his word over a tenured white professor? Maurice could see the gears turning. He had seen them before, in job interviews, in grocery stores, in the eyes of security guards. He recognized the quiet calculations of someone measuring whether his dignity was worth anything at all. He reached to erase the board, but Klein stopped him. Wait. Maurice held the eraser midair. Do you have more of this? Klein asked, voice low. Maurice didn't move. Klein took a long breath. I want to understand it. Maybe, work together. Maurice studied his face. There was no invitation in that voice. Just hunger. Before he could respond, Klein's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then pocketed it again. He looked back at the boards, eyes full of calculation. I'll see you tomorrow, Klein said, too casually. He backed out of the room slowly, the door clicking shut behind him. Maurice stood in silence for a long time. The walls felt closer now, the numbers less stable. He erased the chalkboard, fast and nervous this time, stuffing his notes into a box. Something had shifted. The silence he had mastered for years was about to be broken, and not on his terms. Down the hallway, Klein walked faster now, past the chemistry labs, past the engineering wing, down to the research office. He locked the door behind him, pulled out his phone, and took a picture of Maurice's equations. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the university email system pinged. Faculty Research Spotlight submission, Dr. Sebastian Klein's revolutionary quantum framework, with attachments. Maurice's equations were already in someone else's hands. Sebastian Klein left the closet with the taste of chalk dust still on his tongue, the picture on his phone burning behind his eyelids. He told himself he would sleep on it. That morning would clarify whether this was discovery or delusion. But as he walked the empty corridors toward his office, the silence became a jury. The equations perched in his camera were not just right. They were dangerous in the way that genius often is, capable of collapsing comfortable narratives and opening doors no one had expected to find. He sat down at his desk and stared at the fluorescent hum overhead, imagining the grant proposals, the keynote invitations, the way his name might be carved into lecture halls. For a man like Klein, reputation was capital. He had spent 2 decades building a fortress of publications, citations, and carefully curated controversy. The idea that a janitor might dismantle that fortress felt like a personal affront, but also, cruelly, like opportunity. Klein had been raised on the soft pedagogy of prestige. His mentors at top institutions had taught him to guard intellectual property the way bankers guard portfolios. It was not malice as much as habit, a discipline that conflated ownership with worth. If a student's idea threatened to eclipse a mentor's, careers pivoted, reputations recalibrated. He had watched others take small, defensible steps to protect their careers. He had practiced the moves, the polite suggestion here, the strategic citation there, the quiet nudge toward an editorial board. In his inner monologue, Klein asked the question most people avoid when faced with ethical crossroads. Who benefits from truth, and who benefits from control? The equations in Maurice's closet offered both truth and control, but not to the person who had written them. Klein told himself 1,000 justifications. If these ideas were published under his name, the resulting discourse would push physics forward. Grants would be secured, labs would hire students, an entire field might pivot with the acceleration of funding and institutional interest. Wouldn't that, in the arc of practical good, justify a murky beginning? He tried to imagine meeting Maurice again, to invite him into his lab, to mentor him, publicly, in a way that would both elevate Maurice and validate Klein. In that fantasy version of himself, Klein was magnanimous. Let's co-author, let's apply for funding together. But the fantasy had a quiet hinge. Maurice would be presented as a collaborator with no institutional home, a footnote in a paper that carried Klein's institutional weight. That version soothed Klein's conscience. It reframed appropriation as benevolence. Night turned to dawn, and Klein made lists. He wrote down how he could introduce the material at the upcoming faculty research briefing. A carefully rehearsed talk, a slide showing incremental steps, a citation to an anonymous independent researcher who had contributed preliminary notes. He pictured the applause. He pictured Maurice left in the margins, a warm anecdote in a magazine piece that would never question ownership. The equations would be in the world. His name would be on the paper. Funding would flow into his lab, and by extension into the university's coffers. The university would celebrate him for bringing a revolution home. Despite the calculations in his head, guilt flickered at the edges. He had tutored graduate students, backed younger colleagues for tenure, and at times had felt the rightness of uplifting others. Those memories were like fragile glass, beautiful and easily shattered. He imagined Maurice's face when his ideas were read aloud in a lecture hall, with no acknowledgement. He imagined the sting of being seen, and then eclipsed. For a moment, Klein allowed himself the uncomfortable empathy that sometimes arrives late, like a delayed payment. When the faculty briefing was announced, 2 days hence, it crystallized a choice. Klein could present the equations as his own framework of discovery, or he could find Maurice and find a way to lift him publicly without losing credit. Each option had contingencies. If he presented alone and claimed authorship, he risked a later public scandal should the true source be revealed. If he invited Maurice forward, the university's gatekeepers, department chairs, grant committees, donors, would have to accept that a janitor had authored work worthy of funding. The university did not like its narratives disrupted. It preferred the tidy loop of prestige. Klein rehearsed both scenarios aloud in his office. The voice of the conscientious professor, and the voice of the ambitious man arguing as if they were two students. He imagined Maurice's reaction if Klein offered mentorship. Suspicion, disdain, rightful fury. He imagined being subpoenaed in a malpractice suit, and how the internal memos and email chains could be weaponized. He imagined the Dean Meredith Faulkner, at the head of the table, her practiced smile converted to something cold and strategic. He had seen her handle scandals before, and she had a particular talent for turning moral outrage into institutional protection. That afternoon he stopped by the janitor's supply room, under the pretense of discussing maintenance schedules. Maurice was there, polishing a floor buffer, with the meticulous care of a man accustomed to making things shine. He looked up when Klein entered, and for a second they simply regarded one another, the awkwardness like a physical substance between them. "I found your notes," Klein said, keeping his voice level. Maurice's expression didn't change much. The man had the practiced restraint of someone who had been dismissed most of his life. "You looked?" "I saw them," Klein said. He watched Maurice closely. He wanted to see what pride or embarrassment or shame would look like on him. Maurice's face remained even, as if it had learned not to supply others with weapons.
"I did a little. They're quite advanced."
Klein's words tried on the adjective, and found it too small. Maurice nodded. "Been working on it for a while." "You could come by the lab," Klein said, experimenting with tone. "We could go over them together." "I could," he faltered, feeling the two voices inside him again. The one that wanted to be generous and the one that remembered his own climb, and the price of losing ground. Maurice watched him with a patience that made Klein uneasy. "Why?" he asked finally. Klein's mouth slid into a professional smile. "Because no work should sit in a closet. Ideas need company. They need to be argued, tested, extended. I can help you with that." Maurice's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what about credit?" The question landed like a gavel. For the first time, Klein saw Maurice not as a source but as a person who could measure the weighing of his own worth. Klein wanted to answer with the sort of platitudes he'd used to comfort undergrads. We share the credit. We build together. But he also knew how such phrases could be sculptures of power, carved to look like generosity while masking ownership. It will be joint, Klein said, the words soft and calibrated. Co-authored. I'll make sure you are listed. Maurice studied him. You promise? Klein hesitated, feeling the gravity of a promise that could become a lie. He said, yes. Maurice's shoulders relaxed fractionally. It was a small thing, but that smallness meant trust. He reached for a bottle of cleaner and resumed his polishing, as if the conversation had been another task completed. After Klein left, the interior fight he had attempted to calm erupted. The promise he'd given Maurice was now a public contract between his better self and his ambition. He paced, rationalizing the path forward. If he kept the promise, he would have to cede some of the glory and risk the university's discomfort. If he broke it, he would gain immediate recognition, but potentially ruin a life, Maurice's and perhaps his own conscience. That night, alone in his study, Klein scrolled through possible language for the faculty briefing. He composed a title that sounded impossibly grand. He drafted an abstract that hinted at a new formalism in quantum entanglement. He typed and deleted sentences, imagining headlines and grant cycles. He imagined Maurice at the podium with him, visible, awkward, grateful, and then with a quick subconscious gesture, erased Maurice from that image. He found he could not imagine the applause for both men equally. One name would carry the narrative, one would be the anecdote. The unexpected twist came not as an act of villainy, but as the pandemic of self-preservation that infects otherwise decent people. Klein found himself clicking submit on the faculty presentation portal, attaching his hastily composed slides, and that photograph of Maurice's board, annotated with minor clarifications that made the work read like his own refinement. The submission notification pinged his email like a tiny iron bell. He felt a small, bright triumph that made his stomach ache. He had convinced himself this was how progress happened, by shepherding genius into institutions that could nurture it. He had also decided quietly, and irrevocably, that he would be the shepherd. 2 hours later, an email from the dean's office appeared in Klein's inbox. Impressive submission, Sebastian. We'll include this in tomorrow's faculty research spotlight. Please be prepared to present. Also, has anyone else been working on this material? The sun had barely warmed the Gothic towers of Ivydale University when Dean Meredith Faulkner read the subject line that would reshape her ambitions. Faculty Research Spotlight. Dr. Klein's Quantum Leap submission. Sitting behind her massive walnut desk, surrounded by curated artifacts from academic titans she barely understood, Meredith wore her usual morning armor, a tailored navy blazer, a smirk that could cut glass, and the perfume of power laced with plausible deniability. She clicked the file. What she saw in those slides startled her. The equations were stunning, meticulous, abstract, daring. They didn't read like the predictable jargon-laced theories her department typically paraded out. These weren't the intellectual filler that earned tenure points or fattened obscure journals. These equations vibrated with a kind of dangerous potential. They suggested something bold, maybe even revolutionary. The kind of work that could put Ivydale's physics department on the map, not just nationally but globally. Meredith leaned forward, her manicured hand scrolling slowly, pausing at each diagram like she was decoding a map to gold. The implications of these formulas, if real, could position Ivydale for multi-million-dollar federal grants, partnerships with national labs, and the kind of legacy her predecessors had only dreamed of. But something itched beneath her polished exterior. Klein. She knew him well. Brilliant. Sure, but also slippery. He was a showman, a careerist, the kind of academic who was always first to speak in meetings and last to do the legwork. He liked attention more than accuracy and rode trends instead of generating them. His name being attached to something this advanced felt off. She'd approved countless of his prior research grants, and this didn't sound like the voice she knew. Still, she couldn't ignore the opportunity. The gears in her mind shifted quickly, reshaping the faculty spotlight into something bigger, a media push, a fundraiser, a national symposium with Ivydale at the center. She could already picture the headline, Ivydale Dean Champions Breakthrough in Quantum Theory. Not Klein, not even the department. She picked up the phone and called the Research and Grants office. I want a federal grant proposal drafted within the week, she said, curt and breathless. Use Klein's submission as the base. Pull his prior publications too. Inflate them if you have to. The administrator on the other end hesitated. Dean Faulkner, that work's not peer-reviewed yet. Doesn't matter, she cut in. By the time it is, we'll already have the funds. Just get me the outline. As she hung up, her mind raced. She could use this momentum for more than money. This was leverage. With enough press, she could push for a board seat on the National Physics Commission. She could rewrite her legacy as more than a safe bureaucrat propped up by cosmetic diversity initiatives. Finally, she could rise above the very people who underestimated her, and she'd do it without apologizing for the whiteness that quietly insulated her every decision. But even as she plotted, suspicion gnawed at her. She opened Klein's personnel file and scanned his academic output. His previous work was conventional, sound, but uninspired. And then, like lightning in a dry forest, came this equation set. Advanced, clean, daring. It didn't match his voice, his rhythm. It felt like someone else had breathed life into those formulas. She summoned Klein to her office. He arrived 15 minutes later, his suit too sharp for morning, a fresh haircut, and the slight swagger of a man who believed he was finally being recognized. Meredith didn't stand when he entered. She simply gestured for him to sit. This work, she began slowly, locking eyes with him, is impressive. Klein nodded, his smile too quick. I've been pushing this for some time. Really? She tapped a nail on the desk. Because it doesn't sound like your earlier research. Klein chuckled, the practiced kind. I guess you could say I had a breakthrough. She didn't laugh. So walk me through the derivation. Klein's face flickered. It was subtle, but Meredith had trained herself to see shifts like that. The faltering pause of someone caught between ego and uncertainty. He started explaining the framework, reciting the slides nearly word for word. But when she interrupted with a deeper theoretical question about the non-local entanglement symmetry, he floundered. That part's still being explored, he said, adjusting his cufflink. Meredith's suspicion hardened into quiet certainty. This work wasn't his. But she said nothing. Not yet. Send me the raw drafts, she said. All of it. I want to see the progression. Klein hesitated. Some of it was written by hand. Notes. I'll, get them scanned. Good, she said, her voice sharpening. And Sebastian, don't share this with anyone outside the faculty. Not yet. We're going to package this carefully. He left with a polite nod, hiding the tension in his jaw. That night, Maurice Langston walked past the supply closet he once considered sacred. It was empty now. His boards erased, his notebooks gone. Even the chalk had been swept away. At first he thought maybe a routine cleaning had happened, but no one touched that closet. No one knew it existed. He went to the janitorial office. His stomach turned when he saw the work order from earlier that day. Closet B12 cleared for safety concerns. Dean's directive. Maurice's hands trembled as he folded the printout. Something wasn't right. The equations, the room, the board, it was all gone without a word. Later that evening, while replacing a light fixture outside the faculty conference hall, he heard voices inside. He moved quietly, crouching by the open door. The acoustics of the old building carried whispers like wind down a tunnel. Faulkner wants to brand the entire thing under Ivydale's name, came one voice, Klein's. And the author? Asked another professor. She doesn't care, Klein replied, as long as the math is ours now. Maurice leaned back against the wall, the breath leaving his chest like a punctured tire. Ours now? He had known invisibility all his life, but this was theft in its purest form, the kind of theft that smiled to your face, erased your name, and built a podium over your bones. He didn't hear the rest. He couldn't. His ears rang, the blood rushing hot behind them. He returned to the janitorial locker room, sat on the bench, and pulled out his backup notebook from a false bottom in his bag. The same equations were there, in his own handwriting, time-stamped, dog-eared, marked with revisions. Proof. But proof meant nothing if no one cared to look. Meanwhile, back in her office, Dean Faulkner opened a private message from a trustee, a powerful donor with military ties. He had seen the early drafts of Klein's work and requested a call. National security applications, he wrote. Potential quantum communication protocols. DARPA will want in. Keep this internal. She leaned back, blinking at the screen. This was bigger than grants. This was government contracts. Defense partnerships. Real capital. Her thoughts sharpened. Maurice Langston could never be allowed to surface. She drafted a university-wide email, Due to a recent security breach in restricted academic spaces, we will be increasing surveillance and access limitations in the physics and engineering wings. All unauthorized personnel found in research areas after hours will be subject to disciplinary action. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. At 3:04 a.m., Maurice sat outside the building on a bench near the greenhouse, watching the campus lights flicker through the trees. He held his notebook in his lap and stared at the old physics building across the quad. The halls he had cleaned now echoed with his stolen ideas. He whispered to himself, "I was trying to stay out of the way." His voice cracked. He had stayed quiet his whole life. He had swallowed disrespect, dodged confrontation, accepted erasure as currency for survival. But this theft of mind, of creation, of worth was a wound deeper than insult. He flipped open the notebook again, scanning through the formulas. They were his, and someone had taken them. But who? Just then, a campus-wide email alert buzzed Maurice's phone. He opened it and froze. Attached to the university announcement was a spotlight flyer. Tomorrow's lecture, Dr. Sebastian Klein presents his revolutionary quantum framework. No mention of Maurice. No acknowledgement. Only the headline, Ivydale's own genius breakthrough. The lecture hall glowed with polished ambition. Dozens of faculty, donors, and administrative elites filled the velvet seats, each with a branded brochure in hand, titled Reimagining Quantum Futures. A talk by Dr. Sebastian Klein. Cameras were mounted at perfect angles, and at the back of the room, a placard displayed the news that had just broken that morning. Evydale University receives $2 million federal quantum research grant. Applause erupted as Klein approached the podium. His expression rehearsed to mix humility with gravitas. He adjusted his tie and tapped the mic. Behind him, an enormous projection lit up with graphs and formulas, the same ones born in chalk and sweat in a supply closet no one had ever visited until they were stolen. Near the stage, Dean Faulkner smiled with thin approval, her phone already buzzing with messages from trustees and press agents. This was a moment carefully curated for legacy. And in the back of the hall, pushing a mop bucket across the floor to remove a stubborn coffee spill from earlier, stood Maurice Langston. His body moved mechanically, back straight, head down, but his mind roared with grief. Every word Klein spoke into the microphone was a blade turned inward. He listened to his language, terms he'd coined, variables he'd defined, repurposed with a veneer of institutional polish. Maurice wasn't just witnessing theft, he was cleaning the floor beneath it. Klein's voice echoed with performative conviction. This framework challenges traditional interpretations of non-local entanglement and repositions the observer's role as a gravitational constant within a layered quantum architecture. Maurice blinked slowly. He remembered the night he first theorized that model. He'd spilled a cup of instant coffee on a physics magazine and written the idea in the margin. That page had never left his side until it had. The audience clapped. A few professors leaned in, murmuring impressed comments. Someone whispered, "This could make him a candidate for the MacArthur." Maurice felt every syllable like a weight in his chest. He wanted to scream, but he also knew what happened to black men who interrupted white comfort. They were dismissed, dismantled, or disappeared. He looked down and continued scrubbing. Near the back row, seated between two computer science students, Jalen Monroe, a freshman engineering major, narrowed his eyes. Something didn't feel right. Jalen had noticed Maurice before, how he always seemed lost in thought, how he scribbled in a thick notebook between shifts, how he lingered outside the physics building, long after he'd clocked out. Jalen admired him quietly, even if he didn't know why. There was a gravity around Maurice, a quiet brilliance that didn't fit the janitor's uniform. Now, as Klein launched into a Q&A, Jalen's gaze drifted back toward Maurice, and what he saw stunned him. Maurice was standing completely still now, eyes locked on the stage, his mouth in a faint grimace. The kind of expression Jalen's grandfather used to wear during sermons when someone twisted scripture to fit their ego. Jalen leaned toward the student next to him. "You ever seen that janitor before?" The girl shrugged. "I think so. He's always around engineering." Jalen nodded, but kept watching. Maurice turned slowly, picked up his supplies, and began walking toward the side exit. Something about his movement, stiff, hollow, felt like heartbreak. That night, while most students celebrated the university's newfound prestige, and Twitter flooded with congratulatory threads about Klein's black hole boundary theory, Jalen did something he never expected to. He followed Maurice. Not aggressively, not with malice, but with curiosity rooted in something deeper, recognition. He trailed him through the side halls of the physics wing, past flickering exit signs and outdated award displays. Maurice didn't notice. His body moved like it had been drained of soul, as if autopilot had taken over. He stopped in front of a door with no nameplate and slid out a key from his pocket. Jalen ducked behind a corner and watched. Maurice entered. Jalen waited until the door clicked shut. Then he crept forward and, heart racing, pressed his ear to the wood. Silent. He waited another minute before daring to push the door open. Just a crack. What he saw made his breath catch. The room was dimly lit, with a single standing lamp flickering in the corner. The walls were lined with whiteboards and old chalkboards, and every inch of them was filled with equations. But this wasn't academic scribbling. This was deliberate, dense, genius-level work, the kind that felt like walking into Da Vinci's workshop. Raw, furious intellect scrawled into time. Maurice stood in the center, motionless, holding a piece of chalk. His eyes were fixed on a single formula, the one Klein had presented just hours earlier. Without turning, he spoke. "You shouldn't be in here." Jalen stepped forward anyway. "I'm sorry. I saw you at the lecture. I saw your face. And now this. These equations, they're yours, aren't they?" Maurice didn't answer. Jalen moved slowly, as if stepping through sacred ground. "That stuff Klein presented. You wrote it. That's why it didn't sound like him. That's why you looked." He hesitated, struggling to find the word. "Hurt." Maurice finally turned. His eyes were red, but his posture was still composed. "You a student?" "Yeah," Jalen said. "Engineering major. Freshman." Maurice studied him. "Then let me give you a lesson." He walked to the board and pointed at a section of the equation. "You know what this means?" Jalen peered closer, squinting. "It's a quantum field interaction." "Not just that," Maurice said. "It's a bridge between entangled systems across asymmetrical frames. It means two things that shouldn't even know each other exist, can still influence each other." Jalen blinked, stunned. "I've never seen that in any textbook." "You won't," Maurice said quietly, "because it's mine, and I gave it away." A long silence passed between them. Jalen finally said, "Why?" Maurice set the chalk down. "Because I thought maybe, just maybe, if someone else said it, someone with the right skin, the right title, it would be heard. I didn't think he'd steal it. Not like this." Jalen nodded slowly. "You need to tell someone." Maurice shook his head. "And say what? That the janitor out-quantumed the professor? Who's gonna believe me? You saw the crowd. You saw that stage. They'd call me crazy, or worse." Jalen opened his mouth, but Maurice cut him off. "This university was never built to hear voices like mine. It was built to keep them out. And when they slip in through the back door, like I did, it pretends they're ghosts." Jalen's hands clenched at his sides. He felt rage, not just for Maurice, but for every black student who had to smile through microaggressions, who was asked to prove their worth twice as hard, only to have their brilliance dismissed or stolen. "This isn't over," Jalen said, voice low. Maurice gave a sad smile. "It always is," but Jalen wasn't so sure. He stared at the room one last time, letting the equations imprint in his mind like photographs. Then he left. The next morning, Jalen returned with a plan, only to find the door to Maurice's secret room padlocked shut, a red sticker across it, "Unwena Twi-Side Access Investigation Pending." And Maurice? Nowhere to be found. The padlock glinted under the fluorescent light, like a sealed coffin. Jalen stood frozen, backpack still on, staring at the red sticker slapped across the closet door. "Unwena Twi-Side Access Investigation Pending." His stomach twisted. Maurice was gone. The hallway, once alive with whispers of unseen brilliance, now felt haunted, erased. Jalen pressed his ear to the door, hoping to hear even a faint sign inside. Chalk scraping, a breath movement. Nothing. The room that had revealed the universe's secrets was now silenced by bureaucracy. Jalen stormed out of the building, rage pulsing through him in steady beats. He checked the janitor's usual routes, knocked on maintenance closets, walked the perimeter of campus. Nothing. The man who had redefined entanglement was now invisible again. It wasn't until nightfall, under the sodium yellow haze of a street lamp near the maintenance sheds, that he found him. Maurice sat alone on a plastic crate, a cigarette between his fingers, not smoking it, just holding it, staring into nothing. Jalen approached slowly. It disappeared. Maurice didn't look at him. They took the room. Jalen sat beside him. I saw what happened. Maurice inhaled, then spoke so quietly it felt like confession. The morning after the lecture, I came back to collect my last notebook. The boards were wiped clean. Door was open. Security was waiting. Did they say anything? Said the space was unauthorized. That it had been flagged for safety violations. Said my access was suspended. Jalen's jaw clenched. That's a lie. Maurice gave a humorless chuckle. It's not a lie, Jalen. It's policy. Policy's just a cage built with bigger words. He finally looked at the younger man. Why are you still poking around? You don't owe me anything. Because I saw your work, Jalen said. And I saw his face while he lied through it. Maurice didn't answer. And because, Jalen added, I know what it feels like to be black and brilliant and doubted. That sentence cracked something open. Maurice sighed, deep and heavy. They've been doubting me since I was 9. I remember my 3rd grade teacher, Miss Clausen. I solved a long division problem on the board faster than she could. She made me erase it, and told the class I cheated. Sent me to detention for disruption. He looked away again. That was the first time I realized they weren't scared of my failure. They were scared of my potential. Jalen nodded slowly. So you stopped showing it. Maurice exhaled. Stopped asking to be seen. Figured I'd build a quiet place where the math couldn't be taken. But it was never really mine. Was it? Jalen hesitated. It is yours. Maurice raised a brow. Not according to the faculty. Not according to the newspapers. Not according to the man cashing checks on my formulas. Silence settled like dust between them. Somewhere in the distance, a sprinkler clicked on. You should go public, Jalen finally said. Maurice turned sharply. What? You have backup notebooks, right? Dates, revisions, originals?
I do.
Then let's expose him. Social media, TikTok, Reddit, something. Once it's out, they can't ignore it. Maurice shook his head. You think that'll change anything? They won't believe a janitor. Especially not a black one. You know what they'll say? That I'm bitter. That I'm confused. That I misunderstood the work I was cleaning. Jalen leaned forward. You're not alone anymore. You have me. And I'm not just some undergrad. I've got followers. Professors who respect me. People will listen. Maurice looked at him. Expression tight. And when they don't, Jalen's voice dropped. Then we make them. That evening, in the engineering lab where Jalen had after-hours keycard access, they spread out notebooks, marker boards, and a borrowed camera setup from the media center. Jalen cleared a space, taped a sheet of black velvet behind the whiteboard, and adjusted the lighting so it looked cinematic. Maurice, reluctant at first, eventually stepped in front of the camera. I'm Maurice Langston, he began, voice uncertain. For the last 6 years, I've worked as a janitor here at Ivydale University. But long before that, I was a physicist. I just never got the chance to say it out loud. He paused. Jalen gave him a thumbs up from behind the camera. Maurice took a breath. What I'm about to show you was stolen from me. But before they took the chalk off the boards, I committed it to memory. He turned to the whiteboard and began reconstructing the framework. Step by step. Every symbol flowed from him, like music. His hand moved with a precision that made Jalen's skin prickle. Maurice narrated the theory. What Dr. Klein presented last week wasn't his. It's this, a model I developed in a maintenance closet, between shifts, using chalk scraps and abandoned textbooks. This is my work, and this is how I prove it. He paused midway, turned back to camera. But this isn't about one man stealing from another. It's about a system that only recognizes genius when it wears a name tag that makes them comfortable. Jalen was still. The weight in the room had changed. They were no longer filming proof. They were filming protest. As the footage neared completion, Jalen checked the angles again. We'll edit it. Add annotations, timestamps, overlay some slides from Klein's presentation. Show how yours predates them. Maurice nodded, visibly exhausted. All right. They packed up slowly, folding boards and stacking notebooks. Jalen carried the camera case to the door and reached for the light. That's when Maurice froze. His eyes locked on the narrow window slit in the lab door. A shadow moved. Jalen looked too late. The hallway was empty again, but the air was no longer neutral. It carried surveillance. Maurice whispered, "Someone's watching." Jalen pulled out his phone and rewound the lab footage. The camera angle from the side had caught a brief flicker. A face, a woman. Blurred, white. He zoomed in. It was Dean Faulkner. Or someone who looked a lot like her. Jalen looked at Maurice. We need to move. Maurice didn't hesitate. Back door. Boiler hallway. They exited into a dim stairwell, and down 2 floors. The boiler hallway hadn't seen maintenance since the Obama administration. They ducked into a storage room, and locked it from the inside. Jalen pulled out his phone. I'll upload the footage to a cloud drive. Use a VPN. Password protect it. Just in case. Maurice leaned against the wall. This was never supposed to happen.
You mean the theft?
Maurice shook his head. No. Being seen. The words landed like a confession from a man who had convinced himself invisibility was survival. Jalen glanced up from his phone. But now you are being seen. And they're scared.
Maurice gave a bitter smile. Then let's give them something to really be scared of.
Just as Jalen hit upload, a campus-wide alert buzzed both their phones. Emergency security memo. Suspicious activity reported in engineering hall. If spotted, report immediately. Students are not permitted in restricted labs after hours. The upload reached, then stalled, then froze. Jalen tapped the screen. Maurice looked over. What is it? Before Jalen could respond, the lab Wi-Fi cut out entirely. A second alert popped up. Network disabled due to breach risk. Faculty devices only. All others blocked. And then a soft click at the storage room door. Someone was outside, turning the handle immediately. The sound of the storage room door handle, jiggling, echoed like a blade being drawn. Maurice and Jalen didn't move, barely breathed. In the stifling dark, the silence between clicks became a kind of language. They know. The handle stopped, then footsteps retreated. But the air didn't relax. It was only the beginning. The next morning, Jalen's hands trembled as he opened his phone. The upload they had initiated, Maurice's filmed rederivation of the equations, had been frozen at 22% overnight. When he logged back in, the video was gone, not partially saved, not corrupted. Gone. Jalen refreshed the cloud account. Nothing. He checked the recycling bin. Empty. He tried his VPN blocked. Even the backup email he had set up for redundancy bounced back with an error. Someone scrubbed it, he muttered, furious. Maurice sat across the table, notebook open, staring blankly at the equations he had now rewritten for the 5th time in 2 days. This is what they do, he said quietly. This is how they win. No, Jalen snapped, louder than he intended. They win when we quit. Maurice looked up, exhausted. We're not even in the same game. They're on a field with rules made for them, referees trained in their language. You and me, we're just running laps around the stadium, hoping someone opens a gate. Jalen leaned forward. Then we tear the gate off the damn hinges. Elsewhere on campus, inside a sterile conference room lined with leather chairs and outdated motivational posters, Dean Meredith Faulkner met with the university's head of security. She reviewed printed surveillance stills, blurry images from engineering hallways, 2 figures moving through the building after hours, the timestamp matching the night the alert was triggered. Are we sure it's them? She asked without looking up. Facial recognition picked up Langston's ID outside Lab 3B. The student's badge was also scanned at 9:43 p.m. Faulkner tapped the image. That's after the policy change. Unauthorized access. Correct. She leaned back. Double janitorial surveillance. Quietly. Don't make a show of it. But I want every closet, hallway, and lounge monitored. Especially after hours. Understood. Do we inform the union? She gave him a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Not unless you want a story in the Chronicle. The officer left. Faulkner swiveled in her chair, staring out the window at the bell tower beyond. She felt something crawling just outside the limits of her control. Klein's equations had brought attention, but now attention was aflame, and Langston was the smoke that threatened to turn it into fire. She had once admired men, like Klein, for their ability to wrangle brilliance into career power. But Langston? He was a wild card. Unpredictable. Unacceptable. In the following days, janitorial teams began reporting strange interactions. Cameras that were never there before now watched over mop sinks. Maurice was no longer greeted with the casual shoulder nods he once received. Instead, colleagues avoided his eyes. Some had heard whispers, rumors that he was under investigation. A few had been quietly told that he was making trouble. The morning after his badge stopped working on 3 maintenance closets, Maurice knew surveillance had reached his world. At noon, he found his janitor's cart had been reassigned to a different wing. No explanation, no notice, just a laminated slip reading, effective immediately. That evening, he met Jalen under the bleachers near the track field. "They've boxed me in," Maurice said, his breath fogging in the cool night air. "They're cutting access one door at a time." Jalen handed him a new USB drive. "We try again. We re-record it. This time in my dorm. I'll mirror the files across 6 backups." Maurice raised an eyebrow. "Won't that draw heat?" Jalen smirked. "Good." They filmed the sequence again. This time slower, more precise. More precise. Maurice annotated the derivations, cross-referenced timestamps, and spoke directly to the camera. "If you're watching this," he said at the end, "then they couldn't stop all the copies." After editing the footage, Jalen set the upload again, across encrypted drives, peer-to-peer channels, and one hidden link to a student journalist's email inbox. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was enough to make them feel one step ahead, until it happened again. By the next afternoon, all backups were gone. Every single one. Even the journalist's inbox showed a blank thread. "Impossible," Jalen whispered, staring at his screen. "They'd need root-level server access." Maurice didn't say anything. He just rubbed his eyes and sat on the dorm bed like the weight of the university had finally anchored to his shoulders. Jalen said, "We go to the media. We name names. Go public." Maurice looked at him. "Do you know what they'll say when a black janitor accuses a tenured white physicist of theft, without proof?" He didn't wait for an answer. "They'll say it's jealousy, resentment, a desperate man making wild claims. They'll call me bitter, dangerous. They'll say I'm tarnishing the name of the university that gave me a job." Jalen swallowed hard. "And me? They'll say you're young, naive, influenced by a disgruntled worker who's probably mentally unstable." Jalen paced. "So we just stop?" Maurice's voice cracked. "No. We find another way." That other way came in the form of an anonymous email Jalen received at 3:08 a.m. the following day. Subject: check the archives. Physics Dep. Vault 2. No sender. No signature. Attached was a single image, a scanned sheet from a notebook, unmistakably in Maurice's handwriting. A page from the original equations. Jalen woke Maurice up in a panic. He stared at the screen, his face unreadable. "That's mine," he said. "Then someone saved your notes and wants to help." Jalen leaned forward. "We break into the archives. We find the rest. That's our proof." Maurice didn't blink. "We'll never make it in there." Jalen smiled tightly. "I know someone who can." That evening, Maurice returned to his shift in the East Wing. The halls were quieter than usual. He pushed his cart slowly, lost in thought. As he reached his locker near the mechanical room, he noticed something taped to it. A plain white envelope. No name. He opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, printed. Precise. Cole. Stop. Or get fired. He stared at it for a long moment. His breath shallow, not out of fear, but fury. This wasn't just a threat. It was a reminder that even a man capable of rewriting quantum theory could still be cornered with a paycheck. He slipped the note into his pocket and quietly closed the locker. Then he walked away. No hesitation in his stride. He wasn't going to stop. What he didn't know was that in the office next door, Dean Faulkner was watching live footage of the hallway and had just clicked Open Investigation File Langston. A red tag flashed on her screen, high-risk internal leak. The first whisper wasn't loud. It never is. It began in the faculty lounge, nestled between refills of imported coffee and recycled conversations about sabbaticals and publication deals. A younger adjunct, emboldened by tenure-track dreams and fragile alliances, leaned over his muffin and said with a smirk, "You hear about the janitor who thinks he's Einstein?" Polite laughter followed. Quiet, but not uncomfortable. It traveled fast. By the next day, professors in other departments had picked up the phrase, half joke, half meme. "Einstein with a mop," they said, often just loud enough for others to hear. Some added mock concern. "Hope he doesn't quantum tunnel through the janitor's closet and into my lab budget." The comments weren't just cruel. They were surgical. They masked deep unease behind humor, masking fear with mockery. Dean Faulkner said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence functioned like oxygen, feeding the fire without holding the match. In her office, she monitored the situation like a tactician, watching Maurice's digital trail, reviewing every access log, noting which buildings he entered and when. She told herself it was necessary. That order required vigilance. But beneath that justification sat a more ancient motive: control. Meanwhile, Klein played innocent. He attended department meetings with a veneer of calm, nodding through praise, pretending not to notice the side glances. When asked about the origin of the equations, he stuck to his story. They came together over several months. A personal breakthrough, long overdue. But even he could sense something shifting beneath the surface. A week after Maurice received the threat in his locker, a new rumor surfaced, this one whispered by someone in administration. "I heard the janitor filmed himself redoing the math," someone said near the printers. "They say he had a whole wall of equations, better than Klein's. They're trying to bury it." Another voice replied, "Why would someone like that even know what a tensor field is? Please." These weren't just whispers now. They were tests, ways to measure who would laugh and who would flinch. And someone had started listening. In the back corner of the sociology building, buried under the usual buzz of theory debates and white guilt workshops, Professor Marion Doyle sat hunched over her screen. She had seen the whispers mutate into something uglier. And then she'd found it, an email forwarded by mistake. It came from a thread among faculty in the Department of Theoretical Sciences. The subject line read, "Langston's Lab Fantasies." The chain included a meme, crudely photoshopped, of Maurice's face pasted onto a chalkboard behind a garbage bin, surrounded by fake equations like EMC clean and Schrödinger's mop. A professor responded beneath, "Let's hope he doesn't discover gravity. He might start levitating our paychecks." Another chimed in,
Maybe he can teach our undergrads.
"They'd finally understand failure." Doyle's face flushed with fury. She scrolled down, shocked to see how many names she recognized. Not just fringe voices. These were tenured, well-funded, often celebrated. She forwarded the chain to herself. She couldn't sit on this. The same week, a faculty dinner was held off campus at a local wine bar. It was supposed to be informal, just a few department heads, deans and professors sharing updates. But someone brought wine. Then more wine. And soon the masks slipped. Phones sat face down on the table. Or so they thought. The conversation drifted toward campus tensions, then toward certain staff members overstepping, and then, "It's a janitor, for God's sake." You give them access to a blackboard, and suddenly they think they're solving the grand unified theory. He should be grateful. Klein's presentation put this university on the map. This whole thing's a fantasy. Probably just scribbles and paranoid delusions. Laughter.
Then a female voice, unmistakably Dean Faulkner's, low but unbothered.
"I'm handling it. He doesn't pose a real threat. Nobody's going to take the word of someone who cleans toilets over a tenured scholar. We keep things internal. We move on." The words landed like acid. What they didn't know, what not a single person at that table realized, was that the bartender's cousin was a senior at Ivydale. And she was recording the audio for her podcast series on academic elitism. At first it was just insurance, something she'd consider editing into a piece later. But after she replayed the clip and heard Faulkner's voice dismissing Maurice Langston with surgical cruelty, she made a decision. The next day, Jalen received an anonymous email. Subject: "Listen before they delete this too." Attached was a 12-minute audio file. No sender. No traceable IP. He listened in horror. When he reached the part where they joked about Maurice's intelligence, he felt his entire chest tighten. When he heard Faulkner's voice, measured and smug, stating no one would believe someone who cleans toilets, he knew what he was holding wasn't just evidence. It was a scalpel, capable of cutting through the fabric of the university's lies. He rushed to Maurice's apartment. Maurice listened in silence, fists clenched on his knees. When it ended, he looked away. "You heard how they talk about me. That's who they really are. Not just Faulkner. All of them. They don't deserve their silence anymore," Jalen said. Maurice looked down. "If this gets out, they'll say it's edited, that it's revenge, that we're trying to smear reputations." Jalen's voice hardened. "And if it doesn't get out, they win." By the next afternoon, Faulkner's office was abuzz. Word had leaked that faculty emails and a possible dinner recording were circulating. She wasn't sure how. No one had come forward. But whispers had changed tone. They weren't laughing anymore. Now they were nervous. She called an emergency meeting with legal. "If this gets out," she said, pacing, "we're talking lawsuits, protests, donor withdrawals. We need to find the source." The legal rep hesitated. "If there's audio of the faculty joking about Langston, It could fall under hostile work environment claims. Faulkner stopped pacing. We deny it. Say it's manipulated. Out of context. Same as always. But if it's verified, then we pivot. Sacrifice a name or two. Not mine. Her mask was gone now. Just calculation remained. That night in a quiet student apartment across campus, Jalen and Maurice sat in front of a laptop. Maurice hovered his cursor over an email draft. To tips, and National Ledger News. Subject Ivydale faculty racism exposed. Verified audio attached. Body. I'm not a student. I'm not a professor. I'm a man who did the math. And I was erased. This is how they talk about black minds behind closed doors. The audio file was attached. Maurice looked at Jalen. You sure? Jalen nodded. It's time. Maurice clicked send. Across town, the email hit a journalist's inbox just as he was preparing a segment on academic integrity. He opened the file, pressed play, and within moments, sat up straight, mouth parted. This wasn't just a story. It was a scandal that could bring down Ivydale's highest office. The article dropped at 8:04 a.m. Eastern Time. No one expected it. Not faculty. Not students. Not the administration that had grown used to insulating its misdeeds under thick layers of protocol and prestige. It landed on the homepage of the National Ledger. Just below the morning headlines and above the fold, Ivydale racism scandal, leaked audio reveals faculty mocked black janitor behind quantum breakthrough. The byline belonged to Corey Madsen, a young investigative journalist, known for unflinching exposés on elitism in academia. He didn't bury the lead. The article opened with a quote from the now infamous dinner recording. Nobody's going to take the word of someone who cleans toilets over a tenured scholar. It hit like a slap. Madsen laid out everything in cold, surgical prose. The emails, the memes, the dinner audio, the silence from the administration. And finally, Maurice Langston, the man whose genius had been reduced to janitorial jokes, and then erased entirely. The piece included a still from one of Maurice's chalkboard equations, contrasted side by side with the slide Klein had presented at the university's celebrated research briefing. The conclusion was unflinching. The work was not Klein's. It was Langston's. And Ivydale knew. Within an hour, the article had over 200,000 shares. By noon, it trended worldwide on Twitter under Nath Janitor and Ivydale exposed. On campus, the fallout was immediate. Protests broke out by lunchtime. Students of all races, but especially black and brown students, gathered outside the administration building, chanting, "We see you, Maurice. Truth can't be mopped away."
No tenure for theft!
Signs filled the air, cardboard shaking in fists that had waited too long for justice. Some read, "Not your token. Not your janitor. Equations can't lie, but deans can." And the most piercing one, "Ask the janitor." Faculty scrambled. Some called emergency meetings. Others locked their office doors. Klein didn't show up to class that day. Dean Faulkner did, but only to slam hers shut. Inside her office, Faulkner was unraveling. Her assistant, red-faced, read headlines from various news outlets. CNN wants a statement. NPR reached out. MSNBC is asking if you'll comment live. Faulkner's teeth clenched. No media. Not yet. The legal team suggested a denial total, and confident. We say the recordings are out of context. We say the equations were developed collaboratively. No admissions, no concession. She nodded stiffly. Set a press conference. 5 p.m. today. I'll make it go away. Meanwhile, in a quiet apartment a mile off campus, Maurice sat at his small kitchen table, hands shaking as he scrolled through the article. He didn't cry. He didn't cheer. He just sat there, silent, shaken, seen. The phone buzzed non-stop calls, texts, messages from former coworkers, old friends, even strangers. His voicemail filled up within 2 hours. Then came a text from Jalen. "They're out there, chanting your name." Maurice didn't reply. He couldn't. Not yet. It wasn't that he didn't feel the weight of the moment. He did. It pressed on every nerve, every bone. But the spotlight didn't feel like sunlight. It felt like a scalpel. He'd lived in the shadows so long, he didn't know how to stand still in the open without bleeding. At 4:45 p.m. he turned on the TV. The press conference took place on the front steps of Ivydale's historic Langford Hall. Dean Faulkner emerged in a navy blazer and low heels, flanked by 2 faculty members and a stone-faced PR manager. She stepped to the mic, her tone already molded into corporate grief. First and foremost, we take these allegations very seriously. The crowd jeered. She continued, unfazed. The recordings released this morning, while concerning, do not reflect the values of this institution. Context is important, and these were private conversations, selectively edited. Jalen, standing in the crowd, shouted back, then released the full tape. Faulkner didn't acknowledge it. She shifted to safer ground. We are launching an internal review to determine the origins of the research in question. Dr. Klein maintains he authored the work independently. At this time, we are not prepared to make assumptions or take disciplinary action. The crowd roared in disbelief. Then a student raised a sign above the heads of protesters. The cameras zoomed in on it instantly. It read, "Ask the janitor." Faulkner paused. For a moment the mask cracked. She looked toward the student holding the sign, then toward the rows of cameras broadcasting live. Her voice faltered for the first time. "That will be all." She turned and walked away as boos erupted behind her. That night, as news stations replayed the press conference and social media lit up with fury, Maurice's phone rang again. This time it wasn't a student or local journalist. It was CNN. A producer from the national desk left a message. "Mr. Langston, we'd like to invite you for a live interview. Prime time. Anderson Cooper. Your story is the center of a national conversation. We'd like you to have the floor." Maurice sat on the edge of his bed, phone in hand. For a moment, he didn't move. Then Jalen's voice rang in his head. Words from their first late-night conversation. "You're not alone anymore." He picked up the phone. Meanwhile, in a small faculty lounge in the physics building, Klein sat slouched in a chair, watching the news alone. The TV showed clips from the article, overlaying images of Maurice's chalkboard work, and his own stolen slide. His hands fidgeted in his lap. His phone buzzed with a message from Faulkner. "Do not talk to the press. Stay low. Legal will call." He locked the screen. His name was already tarnished, but what scared him wasn't just the exposure. It was the truth unraveling in real time. People were starting to believe Maurice, and belief, once planted, grew wild. That same night, in the campus library, a group of students had gathered around Jalen, watching the article refresh with new updates. One pointed at the sidebar. Trending, Maurice Langston, from janitor to quantum whistleblower, featured guest tonight on CNN. Jalen stared at the screen, both proud and terrified. This moment was bigger than either of them now. Maurice wasn't just fighting for credit. He was fighting against centuries of erasure. And now, millions were watching. In a quiet corner of her office, Dean Faulkner opened her private inbox and froze. There, sitting unread, was an email from a federal investigator. "Due to mounting evidence and whistleblower disclosures, we are formally opening an inquiry into research misconduct and civil rights violations at Ivydale University." The morning of the interview dawned gray and heavy. Rain slicked the pavement outside Maurice's small apartment, each droplet striking the window like an anxious heartbeat. He hadn't slept. His eyes were rimmed in exhaustion, not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to happen. For the first time in his life, the world wanted to hear him speak. His suit wasn't tailored, just an old navy jacket he'd ironed 3 times that morning. The tie was a gift from Jalen, who was pacing near the kitchen table, fussing with his camera equipment. "You sure about this?" Jalen asked. Maurice adjusted his collar. "Sure as I've ever been." The phone rang again, another producer confirming the transportation for the CNN interview. A black car would arrive at noon sharp to take him to the network's local affiliate studio. From there, a satellite feed would connect him live to Anderson Cooper's primetime segment. "You'll be sitting across from the world," Jalen said, half in awe, half in fear. "Once you say it, you can't take it back." Maurice looked at the raindrops trailing down the glass. "I don't want to take it back. I've been quiet for too long." He turned and picked up a worn leather notebook from the table, the same one that had survived the closet, the theft, the cover-up. "They built their lies off my silence," he said. "It's time they learn what my voice sounds like." By mid-morning, the campus was unrecognizable. News vans lined the gates. Reporters huddled under umbrellas. Students waved homemade signs at the camera crews. Math Janitor had reached over 2 million mentions overnight. Inside the administration building, Dean Faulkner's office looked like a war room. She stood behind her desk as legal advisors and PR heads swarmed. "He's scheduled for a live interview at noon," one assistant said, flipping through updates. Faulkner's tone was sharp. "That cannot happen. It's already confirmed with the network." "Then unconfirm it," she snapped. Find a reason. Her legal counsel leaned forward. Dean, if he goes live, he'll talk about the equations, the dinner audio, the racial bias that could open us to class action lawsuits. Faulkner's lips tightened. Then we stop him before he reaches that camera. There was a long pause before one of the administrators, an older white man with the calm of someone too used to systemic cruelty, spoke softly. There's another way. At 11:32 a.m., Maurice locked his door and stepped out into the drizzle. He carried no protest signs, no entourage, just his notebook tucked under his arm. He didn't see the two campus security cars idling a block away. Jalen followed on his bike, camera bag strapped to his back. He planned to film Maurice entering the car, his before the world changes moment. As they crossed the parking lot near the faculty labs, Maurice stopped suddenly. I need to grab something, he said. My badge. Left it in the supply closet last night. Jalen frowned. You sure you have time? It's 2 minutes. Meet me by the gate. Maurice walked toward the lab building, his footsteps echoing on the wet concrete. He swiped his access card. Nothing. The light blinked red. He tried again. Still red. He was turning to leave when 3 uniformed campus officers appeared from around the corner. Mr. Langston, one called.
Maurice froze. Yes?
Sir, we've received a report of unauthorized entry into a restricted faculty research area. He blinked. What? This area's been closed since last week. You'll need to come with us. Maurice's confusion turned to realization in one sickening breath. You've got to be kidding, he said quietly. You're arresting me now? For what? Walking near the building I clean. The officer didn't meet his eyes. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. By the time Jalen saw the flashing lights from across the quad, it was too late. He ran. Wait! He didn't do anything, but the officers were already guiding Maurice into the back of the car. Cameras caught the moment. The janitor whose mind had challenged the universe was now being handcuffed outside the very building where his ideas were stolen. Within minutes, the footage spread across social media. Breaking: Ivydale whistleblower arrested for trespassing. In a cramped security office, Maurice sat silently while an officer filled out a report. The rain had darkened his sleeves. His hands shook, but not from fear, from disbelief at how predictably it had happened. They waited, he thought. They waited for the one moment I stepped back into their world. A woman entered the room, an HR liaison, sharp suit, neutral tone. Mr. Langston, your employment has been suspended pending review of misconduct allegations. He looked up. Misconduct? Unauthorized use of faculty spaces, possession of restricted materials, and potential theft of intellectual property. Maurice stared at her, eyes hollow. You mean my own equations? She blinked once, unmoved. You'll have the opportunity to appeal. He let out a dry laugh. Yeah, I'm sure you'll listen. When she left, he folded forward, elbows on his knees. The clock on the wall ticked toward noon. He should have been in a studio, not a holding room. He should have been speaking truth, not defending existence. Back at Jalen's apartment, the atmosphere was chaos. Phones buzzing, laptops open, Twitter feed exploding with outrage. Jalen sat hunched over his keyboard, heart pounding, typing like a man possessed. They set him up, he muttered. They knew he'd go near that lab. Then he remembered something. Maurice's old footage. The first video they'd shot together before everything got wiped. He tore through folders, external drives, backups. After several minutes, a miracle. One corrupted file still remained. Its timestamp 2 weeks old. He clicked it open. There was Maurice, chalk in hand, his voice steady and calm, as he solved one of the most complex equations in modern quantum mechanics. Jalen's breath caught. The proof was right there. He edited quickly, overlaying a caption. This is the real author of Ivydale's stolen theory. His name is Maurice Langston. Math janitor. He hit upload. The video went live at 12:37 p.m. By 3:00 p.m. Major news outlets picked it up. The footage of Maurice's arrest ran side by side with the video of him calmly deriving equations that top physicists called unquestionably authentic. Commentators on live TV debated whether his arrest was retaliation. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Jan, free Maurice. Justice for Langston. Math janitor. The university tried to issue statements, but they only fueled the fire. CNN's afternoon anchor interrupted breaking news to read a quote from the network's own producer. Our scheduled guest, Maurice Langston, was detained minutes before airtime. We are seeking comment from Ivydale University. The backlash was immediate. In his holding cell, Maurice sat alone, the faint echo of protest chants drifting through the small barred window. He could hear them even here. "We see you, Maurice!" No genius behind bars. He closed his eyes. For the first time he smiled, not with joy but with quiet, aching pride. They couldn't erase him anymore. The world had already seen too much. The door opened. A guard stepped in. "You're being released." Maurice blinked. "What?" Charges dropped. Orders from upstairs. He was escorted out to the parking lot, where Jalen was waiting. Cameras flashed as he stepped into the gray afternoon light. Jalen ran up to him. "You're free, man." The video, it blew up. "You're trending worldwide." Maurice's eyes softened. "They still tried to silence me. They failed," Jalen said. Maurice looked at him. For now, that night, as they sat in Jalen's apartment watching the story unfold, a new email arrived in Maurice's inbox. No subject line, just a single message. "I have more. Internal emails, payment records, falsified grant transfers. But you have to testify, publicly. No deals, no silence. You tell the world in court, and I'll release everything." There was no name, just a closing signature. A friend inside. Maurice read the message twice, then looked at Jalen. "They want me to testify," he said. "But if I do, every one of them falls." Jalen leaned forward. "Then let's make them fall." Maurice looked back at the glowing screen. The cursor blinked over the reply field. For the first time, he wasn't sure if pressing send would save him, or destroy him. The courtroom was not built for spectacle, but that morning it felt like a theater. Reporters lined the back row, notebooks open, cameras banned but rolling just outside the doors. Law students had filled the public gallery, shoulder to shoulder, some sitting on the floor. A few wore shirts that read, "I believe Maurice. Math janitor. Equations don't lie." At the front, seated at the defendant's table, Maurice Langston adjusted the cuffs of his modest blazer. The tie was tighter than he liked. His palms were damp, but his eyes, those deep, quiet eyes, stared ahead with a focus honed, not in lecture halls, but in silence, years of silence. Across the aisle, Ivydale University had come armed for war. Their lead attorney was sharp-jawed and cold-voiced, with a reputation for flipping cases on procedural technicalities. He paced as he delivered the opening statement. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a case not of racism, not of public outrage, but of theft." Mr. Langston knowingly accessed and removed proprietary research materials from faculty laboratories. The institution seeks not punishment, but clarity, and the restoration of intellectual property rightfully belonging to Dr. Sebastian Klein. A murmur moved through the courtroom. At the plaintiff's table, Klein didn't look up. His hands were clasped tightly, his face pale. Maurice's attorney, Cynthia Rhodes, rose. African-American, seasoned, brilliant. She didn't pace, she didn't shout. She simply stood and let silence settle. Then, "Your Honor, we intend to show that not only did Mr. Langston originate the work in question, but that the university has spent years denying his contributions, erasing his voice, and now suing him for the crime of being too brilliant in a uniform they never expected to contain genius." The judge, a steely-eyed white woman named Judge Carolyn Harlow, nodded slowly. "Let's proceed." The first days were brutal. Ivydale's legal team brought in their experts, white-coated PhDs, careful with every word. They pointed to timestamps, badge logs, lab access codes. They painted Maurice as a janitor who had stumbled into greatness, possibly obsessed with a faculty member's discarded notes. He was never authorized to conduct research, one witness said. He had access to cleaning closets, not theoretical spaces. He had no credentials, another added. No published work, no peer-reviewed contributions. The implication was clear. Even if Maurice had ideas, they weren't real without validation from the gatekeepers. Jalen sat behind Maurice every day, taking notes, posting quiet updates. Outside, student protests grew louder. One banner stretched across the courthouse gates read, "Whose genius gets believed?" On the fourth day, Cynthia Rhodes stood and called her witness, Mr. Maurice Langston. He walked slowly to the stand. The room held its breath. Under oath, Maurice recounted everything, from the janitor closet turned lab, to the equations written between trash shifts, from the moment Klein found his notes, to the morning he was arrested. He spoke calmly, No rage. Just clarity. Why didn't you publish it yourself? The university's lawyer asked, smirking. Maurice paused. Because I knew no one would listen. Because you're not an academic. Because I'm black. Because I'm a janitor. Because institutions like yours were built to spotlight people like Dr. Klein, not me. The court fell silent. Then came Cynthia's boldest move. Your Honor, we'd like to present a unique demonstration. With the court's permission, Mr. Langston is prepared to solve live an equation presented as unsolvable by faculty during pretrial discovery. Judge Harlow raised an eyebrow. An unsolvable equation. Yes, Your Honor. The court-appointed physics panel confirmed it had no existing resolution in the current literature. We ask only for 20 minutes. The judge turned to the university. They hesitated, then reluctantly agreed. A whiteboard was wheeled in. Markers handed to Maurice. He stood, back to the court, and began. At first it was quiet. Only the squeak of ink and the low murmur of calculation. Then, after 7 minutes, heads began to tilt. A few of the academic observers leaned forward, their eyes narrowing. Phones buzzed silently as texts passed between seats. He's not just solving it, someone whispered. He's expanding it. By minute 12, the room was a cathedral. Maurice stepped back, capped the marker, and turned. This, he said, pointing to the final expression, is what happens when you view entanglement, not just as a binary relationship, but as a gravitationally informed architecture. He exhaled. And this is my voice. The court-appointed physics expert approached. He scanned the board, then looked at the judge. Your Honor, he said, voice tinged with disbelief. This is original. And it's correct. Gasps echoed around the room. Maurice sat back down, head bowed, not in shame, but release. The next morning, headlines broke across major media outlets. Janitor solves unsolvable equation in courtroom. Genius denied. Maurice Langston's live proof turns trial on its head. Social media exploded again. Scholars tweeted in support. Journalists scrambled for interviews. But the courtroom was not done. That afternoon, Cynthia submitted a motion to subpoena Dean Meredith Faulkner to question her about administrative misconduct, suppression of evidence, and her role in the plagiarism cover-up. The judge leaned forward. You're asking to put the Dean of Ivydale under oath? Yes, Your Honor. Faulkner's attorney immediately objected. But Judge Harlow wasn't moved. Given the public weight of this case, and the evolving allegations, the court finds it appropriate. Subpoena granted. Cameras captured the exact moment. Dean Faulkner, seated in the back of the gallery, froze. Her hands curled around the arms of the chair. She did not speak, but she knew what was coming. Because she had lied. Repeatedly. Under oath. Under pressure. And under the cover of bureaucracy. And now the court would finally force her to speak. As the crowd began to exit for the day, a court clerk approached Maurice quietly, handing him a note from the judge's chambers. It read, Mr. Langston, I need to see you. Privately. Urgent. Maurice looked up, confused. But when he turned around, Klein was gone. The envelope Judge Harlow sent to Maurice wasn't just a note. It was a message. Something's about to break. In her private chambers, the judge sat with her arms crossed, a thin folder in front of her, eyes fixed on Maurice. There's something you need to see, she said, her voice calm but unusually sharp. And you're going to want to stay seated. She opened the folder and slid 3 pages across the desk. They were printed emails, all internal memos from Ivydale's administrative system. Maurice read each one slowly. The text blurred slightly from the weight of what it confirmed. The first was from Dean Faulkner, dated 2 weeks before Klein's presentation. Ensure janitorial access to Lecture B12 is revoked. Dr. Klein has requested exclusive space for theory development. Do not document changes publicly. The second, from a legal staffer. If Maurice Langston attempts to claim authorship, our position is, no formal documentation links him to the material. Stick to that. And the third, perhaps the most damning, was an internal message between Faulkner and Klein. If we manage the messaging, Langston becomes a footnote. The math will speak for itself. He won't have a platform. Maurice felt the blood drain from his face. They knew, he whispered. They didn't just erase me. They strategized it. The judge's voice hardened. And now the court knows too. Judge Harlow didn't stop there. She instructed the court clerk to review university servers for metadata and deleted backups. What came next unraveled everything. In open court the following day, The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Members of the public had begun camping outside the courthouse overnight to get in. Major news anchors attended in person. The air felt thick with something historical, irreversible. Cynthia Rhodes stood, eyes glinting like a steel blade about to cut through years of polished deception. "Your Honor," she said, "with your permission, we would like to submit new evidence discovered through administrative server recovery. It includes deleted footage, collusive emails, and time-stamped memos." Judge Harlow nodded. "Proceed." A screen was wheeled in. First came a series of deleted video clips. The footage showed Maurice in the janitor's closet, his back to the camera, chalk in hand, solving the very same equations Klein would later present. One of the clips even captured a young Jalen peering into the room, astonished. Then the emails appeared, projected in clear, stark font on courtroom monitors. One by one, they painted the full picture. Faulkner's directive to erase Maurice's workspace. Klein's admission that the work was too sophisticated to explain fully, but marketable. A chilling memo instructing the IT department to wipe all unofficial access logs dated before the grant award. By the end, even the reporters stopped taking notes. The silence in the room was unlike anything that had come before it. Not reverent, not shocked. It was rage held back by law. The judge broke it. "Dean Faulkner," she said, voice calm but cracking with finality, "you will return to this courtroom tomorrow for cross-examination under oath." Faulkner sat rigid in the gallery, her carefully curated expression cracked. She whispered something to her attorney, but the damage was already done. Her mask had slipped. Now the world could see the machinery beneath it. That night, the news broke wide. CNN: Ivydale's dean under fire in explosive cover-up trial. MSNBC: emails reveal racial bias. Academic theft at elite university. Twitter: John Faulkner files, trending with over 1.3 million mentions. Clips of Maurice's courtroom equations ran side by side, with footage of Faulkner speaking at prior diversity and STEM summits. The contrast was damning. The media didn't just turn against her, they feasted. And the public was hungry. The following morning, Faulkner walked into the courtroom no longer a symbol of polished leadership, but a woman cornered by her own decisions. She took the stand with the stiffness of someone who knew her testimony could collapse an empire. Cynthia began with a gentle tone. "Dean Faulkner, did you instruct staff to revoke Mr. Langston's access to the research closet?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Did you inform him why?" "No." "Did you believe the equations he was working on had value?" A pause. "At first I wasn't sure. And when you became sure," Faulkner's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's when I realized the institution wasn't prepared to accommodate someone like him." The room held its breath. Cynthia didn't stop. "Did you conspire with Dr. Klein to obscure Mr. Langston's authorship?" Faulkner's jaw tightened. "I didn't conspire. I acted in the best interest of the university." "That's not an answer." Faulkner exhaled. "We wanted to manage the narrative. We didn't expect it to escalate. We thought we could freeze him," Cynthia interrupted. Silence. "Miss Faulkner," the judge said, "please answer directly. Did you lie under oath regarding Mr. Langston's authorship?" Faulkner looked around the courtroom. Faces stared back, unmoved. Students, journalists, attorneys. No friends, no saviors. "Yes," she said finally. "I lied." The words echoed like a verdict. But then came her twist. "I lied," she repeated, "because I was manipulated. By Klein. He convinced me the work was his. He framed it as a mentorship gone wrong. I believed him." Gasps spread through the courtroom. "Are you saying Dr. Klein orchestrated the theft?" the judge asked. Faulkner nodded slowly. "Yes, I facilitated it. But he drove it." Cynthia's expression didn't move. She'd expected this. The inevitable buck passing. "Thank you," she said. No further questions. Within the hour, headlines changed again. Dean Faulkner confesses, blames professor for racist cover-up. Klein accused of orchestrating intellectual theft. The media couldn't keep up, and neither could Klein. When court reconvened to serve him a subpoena for perjury and fraud, he was gone. His home address in the city was empty. His university email had been disabled. His car was no longer registered. No flights under his name had been booked, but border alerts were issued. Judge Harlow authorized a formal notice. Dr. Sebastian Klein is now considered a material witness under investigation. If contact is made, notify authorities immediately. Cynthia folded the paper with slow precision. Maurice didn't say a word, but he knew. They never expected Klein to run. They expected him to fight, to defend the stolen genius like it was his own, to go down swinging, maybe even twisting the story in court. But instead, the man who once stood in the spotlight under Maurice's equations was now a fugitive from truth. As the news of Klein's disappearance dominated the airwaves, a masked figure uploaded a new encrypted file to a public university watchdog forum, titled simply Klein's Private Notes, the plan to silence Langston. The description read, "If this file is taken down, 12 more will be released. Signed, Whistle 42. The courthouse steps were quieter now. The crowds had thinned, the cameras shifted to other stories, and yet Maurice Langston stood there longer than necessary, just past the marble columns, where the shadows of truth still clung to the concrete. He stared out over the campus skyline. Ivydale's spires, so grand in brochures and ceremony, looked brittle in the afternoon haze. Behind those walls were the rooms that had stolen from him. Behind those doors sat the same faculty who had laughed at the idea of a black janitor having a mind worth citing. And yet here he was. The court hadn't just ruled in his favor. It had exposed the entire web, emails, cover-ups, strategic silencing. Klein was still missing. Faulkner's resignation letter had leaked just hours after her courtroom confession. The university's R team was in full spin mode, issuing carefully worded statements about healing policy reviews and diversity audits. But none of that changed the offer. Maurice now held in his hand a letterhead bearing Ivydale's crest. Beneath it, polite words dressed in professional disappointment. The Board of Regents would like to extend an offer of visiting scholar status to Mr. Maurice Langston for a term of 12 months. The position is non-tenure track, with no benefits package at this time. Compensation will be determined per adjunct rate scale. No apology, no retroactive credit, no acknowledgement of the $2 million grant that had used his stolen work as a foundation. Just a name on a title that meant very little, except to them. It was an image fix. A diversity footnote. A salve to soothe public shame. Maurice read it once. Then again. And then he folded it slowly, placed it in his pocket, and left without speaking to anyone. Outside the administrative building, a crowd of students gathered. Some held signs, others held megaphones. Jalen Monroe stood in the center, voice hoarse from leading chants. Say his name. Maurice Langston. Not your janitor. Not your scapegoat. The crowd roared in response. The student sit-in had entered its third day. Over 200 students had pledged to occupy the quad until Ivydale issued a full acknowledgement of Maurice's contributions, retroactive pay, and a tenure-track appointment with research support. But the university's board of trustees wasn't budging. In closed-door meetings, their resistance was clear. We've offered him a position, one board member argued. That should be enough. It's not enough, another countered. We've got national pressure. Students are organizing. Alumni are pulling support. Then came a quiet voice from the end of the table. The oldest trustee, her pearls clutched in one hand like a rosary. If we give him full status, she said, we set a precedent. Others will follow. We'll be flooded with applicants demanding equity. There was a pause. You mean black applicants? Someone said bluntly. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was confirmation. Even after everything, the fear wasn't fraud or scandal. The fear was change. Maurice didn't attend the sit-in. He didn't need to. He saw it on the student live streams. He heard the chants from blocks away. He felt it in the letters students slipped under his door. Thank yous, apologies, confessions of shame for once walking past him without realizing they'd walked past a mind that could bend the universe. Jalen visited often, always bringing updates. They want to schedule another roundtable. You should go. Speak for yourself. Maurice shook his head. Why? So they can nod while I talk. They've already decided what I'm worth. You're worth more than they'll ever admit, Jalen said, voice tight. Maurice smiled gently. Then why haven't they admitted it? There was no answer. That evening, Maurice opened his email to find a new message. The sender was anonymous at first, masked behind a generic domain. The subject line read simply, real recognition. He clicked. A letter appeared. Official MIT letterhead. Warm, clear language. Dear Mr. Langston, we have followed your case with great interest and greater admiration. Your work is not just original, it's pioneering. We believe you have more to offer this field and more to teach the minds who walk through our halls. We invite you to join us as a full-time research fellow. with immediate lab access, full benefits, and tenure consideration pending your first publication. Housing assistance and relocation stipends are available. Let us know when you're ready to begin." Maurice stared at the screen. For a long time, he didn't move. His hand hovered over the keyboard, not with hesitation, but with the heavy weight of memory. He remembered being denied scholarships, watching white students plagiarize his high school ideas and win medals, cleaning floors while undergraduates laughed near chalkboards, never once imagining the man mopping beside them had written proofs they couldn't begin to understand. He read the letter again, and he smiled, not wide, not triumphant, just a small, tired smile. Because finally, someone wasn't asking him to prove his worth. They were simply recognizing it. The next morning, Jalen burst through the door. "You heard?" Maurice turned from the window, holding his coffee. "Heard what?" "The board's doubling down. They're trying to bury the sit-in. They're saying it's disruptive, threatening suspensions." Maurice nodded slowly. "Of course they are." "And Faulkner?" "She's already accepted a private consulting job. 6 figures, no consequences." Maurice didn't flinch. "I got the MIT offer," he said, flatly. Jalen stopped cold. "What?" Maurice handed him the printed letter. "Full research appointment, lab, publication support." Jalen read it, then sat down hard. "That's everything." Maurice nodded. "It is. So you're leaving?" Maurice looked at him. "Wouldn't you?" The silence between them wasn't angry. It was honest. Because for all the chants and protests, for all the headlines and exposure, the university that stole from him still wouldn't say the one thing he deserved to hear. "You were right, and we were wrong." That afternoon, he attended the sit-in. Not to lead, not to speak, but to witness. Students surrounded him. Some hugged him, others just nodded, eyes wide with reverence. Jalen handed him a megaphone. Just one sentence. Maurice took it. He stood atop a makeshift platform, just a crate from the cafeteria. He looked out at a sea of young faces. Hopeful, angry, awake. He cleared his throat. "I never wanted the spotlight," he said. "Just the chalk." He handed the megaphone back and stepped down, and in that moment, the crowd erupted, not for noise, but for what that sentence meant. It wasn't about fame. It had never been about fame. It was about access, recognition, equity, and that was still missing. Cliffhanger. That night, as Maurice began packing for his move to Cambridge, a letter slid under his apartment door. No return address. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "You don't know me, but I'm inside the board. They're planning to block your MIT transition. They've already reached out to discredit your reputation to potential collaborators. They're not done. Be ready." Maurice sat down slowly, because he knew racism didn't end when the trial did. It simply changed its form. The first time Maurice Langston stepped foot onto the MIT campus, the difference was immediate. The halls didn't echo with skepticism. No eyes followed him with suspicion. No one looked twice at the skin on his hands as he adjusted the strap of his laptop bag. He walked not as an anomaly, but as a scholar among scholars. Still, something in him couldn't fully believe it. The letter from MIT hadn't been a gesture. It was real. His new ID badge didn't say custodial or temporary visitor. It's Maurice Langston, Research Fellow, Quantum Computing Division. His office was small but functional, lined with whiteboards and bookshelves already half full with materials he never could have dreamed of accessing years ago. The lab down the hall had granted him unlimited access to simulation tools. His university email was live, and the inbox flooded quickly with invitations from black scientists across the country who had followed his case and now reached out, not with pity, but with respect. He was finally part of the conversation. And yet every morning when he unlocked his office door, a flicker of the past returned. There had been no parades when he left Ivydale, no handshake from the president, no formal apology from the board. They let him walk away like an embarrassing memory they hoped would fade in time. But for Maurice, it never would. His first lecture at MIT was standing room only. It wasn't even advertised publicly. Just word of mouth, a quiet alert passed between graduate students and young faculty of color. "He's here, the janitor who solved quantum entanglement." But by the time he stepped into the lecture hall, the energy was electric. He didn't speak like most professors. He didn't start with credentials or citations. He didn't drone through slides. He began with a question. What happens to genius when no one believes it belongs to you? Silence. Then a hand raised from a young black woman in the front row. They steal it. Maurice nodded. They steal it. Or worse, they tell you you imagined it. His voice didn't shake, but behind it lay 1,000 moments no one had seen. Years of isolation, of self-doubt sharpened by systemic condescension, of ideas tossed into the void. Then he turned to the whiteboard and began writing. But instead of equations, he wrote one sentence. You don't owe them your silence. Outside of lectures, Maurice became more than a professor. He became a mentor. Black students, Latinx students, first-generation kids, all started finding reasons to linger after office hours. One by one, they shared their stories. Professors who dismissed their research ideas without reading them. Advisors who told them to aim lower. Classmates who asked if they got their scholarships through special programs. And Maurice would listen, fully, quietly. Then he'd pull out a piece of chalk and draw something on the board. Sometimes a formula, sometimes just a name. A black scientist history forgot. A mathematical proof buried in racism. He made the office feel like a sacred rebellion. But in private, when the door closed and the noise faded, the scars throbbed again. He never stopped thinking about that janitor closet. The way it felt cramped, dusty, holy. The only place in Ivydale where his thoughts could breathe without being watched. He remembered the chalk squeak, the cardboard boxes stacked as makeshift shelves, the weight of knowing he was solving questions people with PhDs feared to touch, and doing it in a room meant to hold mops. At MIT, he had access. He had respect. But he still locked his notebooks in a drawer at night. He still checked over his shoulder when he entered secure labs. He still flinched at certain phrases: review committee, intellectual property, peer approval. Because even though the space had changed, the ghosts had followed. One afternoon, he received a package with no return label. Inside was a book, worn, spine cracked. It was a 1982 edition of Advanced Quantum Structures. Inside the front cover, in faded pen, were the words, property of East St. Louis Public Library. Discard copy. He knew it immediately. It was his copy. The one he'd pulled from the trash, as a teenager. The one that started it all. Attached was a note. Found this while scanning archives from a donation batch. Thought it might belong to you. The way you wrote in the margins felt like someone trying to break through a wall. T.S. Maurice held the book like a prayer, because it wasn't just paper and ink. It was proof not for the world, but for himself, that the boy in the shadows had always been right. That the man standing here had never imagined the brilliance inside him. But not all the past stayed buried. Back at Ivydale, a quiet shuffle had begun. The administration issued no press releases, no apologies. They painted over the protest murals, scrubbed sidewalks clean. The student sit-in had ended after winter break, and most of the signs had disappeared. But one evening just past midnight, a new janitor, young, black, thin-framed, was cleaning an unused wing of the old physics building. He moved room to room with practiced silence. When he reached a narrow hallway near Lecture B12, he noticed something odd, a vent panel hanging loosely near the floor. Curious, he bent down, pulled it open, and froze. Inside, barely visible under dust and cobwebs, were torn-up papers. Dozens of them, shredded and jammed behind the wall. He pulled one out, then another. They weren't Maurice's formulas. Not quite. They were different, unfamiliar, but just as complex, just as wild, as if someone else had been writing in the dark, hidden and brilliant, erased before they ever had a chance. The janitor looked around, heart racing. Was it possible? Was someone else here before Maurice? Or after? The next day, that same janitor filed a routine maintenance report. But tucked inside was a note, slid quietly under a professor's door. You missed someone. And this one's still here. The whispers began like déjà vu. First, it was a rumor passed between two curious students who studied late in the observatory wing. Then it traveled across cafeteria tables, into group chats, and through anonymous posts on the university's confessions page. Another janitor. Equations in the mop closet. This time it's astrophysics. His name was Terrence Miles, 27. Tall, reserved, black, employed as a nighttime custodian at Ivydale University for just over a year. Cleaned 3 science wings, 4 nights a week. But more than once, students walking by after hours had seen something strange, glimpses of star charts drawn across chalkboards, planetary trajectories mapped with laser precision. Some even claimed to have seen Miles himself, scribbling calculations on break room napkins, lost in thought. Of course, the administration denied everything. There is no indication Mr. Miles is engaged in unauthorized academic work, read the official statement. Please refrain from spreading unfounded rumors. But that was exactly the same language they had used when Maurice Langston was just a shadow pushing a broom. And this time, someone was listening. Jalen Monroe, now a second-year PhD student in applied mathematics at Stanford, saw the post late one night. He was up prepping data for his thesis when a headline popped into his feed. Miles' method? Students claim another janitor is doing advanced physics at Ivydale. His heart sank. Not because he didn't believe it, because he did. He clicked the video embedded in the post. It was grainy, filmed through a cracked lab window, but clear enough. There was Terrence standing in front of a whiteboard, eyes locked in concentration, hands moving fast across a series of equations that took Jalen several seconds to register. They weren't random. They were specific. Astrophysical fluid dynamics. The kind of math you only touched if you were trying to predict gravitational interactions between celestial bodies on a galactic scale. Jalen leaned back, exhaled. No, not again. The next day, he booked a ticket to Ivydale. The campus hadn't changed much. Same brick facades, same high iron gates. But it felt different now. The walls whispered of what had happened here. The students had aged, the protest signs gone. But the energy, the distrust in the institution lingered like smoke. Jalen didn't waste time. He headed straight to the maintenance office and waited. At 5:13 p.m., Terrence walked in, still in uniform, carrying a mop bucket. Jalen approached quietly. Terrence? The man turned. His eyes, wary at first, widened. You're Jalen, from the Langston case. Can we talk? Terrence hesitated, then nodded. They found an empty bench near the back of the quad. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the pavement. Jalen spoke first. I saw your equations. Terrence didn't deny it. They're not perfect. I'm still working on the fifth model. Fifth model? Terrence nodded, trying to simulate dark matter interactions across collapsed starfields. Jalen blinked. That's PhD-level work. Terrence gave a half smile. Didn't need a degree to see the stars. A pause. Then Jalen asked, has anyone tried to stop you? Terrence looked away. They told me not to use the labs anymore. Changed the door codes last week. Said the space was being renovated. Same night I saw my notes shredded in the trash. Jalen's fists clenched. History wasn't repeating. It was trying to erase itself again. But this time, it wasn't alone. Jalen went straight to the student paper. He found the same editor who had helped him publish Maurice's equations all those years ago. Together, they dug. Requests for Terrence's employee file were denied. Emails to the department head went unanswered. Security footage mysteriously glitched on nights Terrence had worked. And yet, students kept submitting clips, photos, even pieces of torn equations they'd picked out of trash bins. The Miles pattern, as some began to call it, started gaining traction. Within 3 days, the hashtag #ProtectTerrence was trending across STEM Twitter. Prominent black physicists reposted with fury. This is how you treat brilliance, one wrote. Haven't we been here before? Terrence remained hesitant. He'd seen what had happened to Maurice, how they'd framed him, handcuffed him, tried to turn genius into trespassing. I don't want to go public, he told Jalen. Not yet. I can't afford to lose this job. Jalen didn't push, but he started preparing anyway. He contacted allies at MIT, set up secure cloud backups for Terrence's work. He even installed a hidden webcam in the supply room, a move Terrence only agreed to after learning they'd already started deleting logs of his building access. Then came the final straw. It happened on a Wednesday. Terrence arrived for his shift as usual, but when he reached the physics building, his badge didn't work. He tried again. Nothing. He walked around to the secondary door. Locked. Inside, he could see the whiteboards had been erased. A new sign had been posted. Cleaning access restricted. Temporary closure due to safety protocols. He stood there for a full minute. Then he turned, walked away, and straight into Jalen, who had been filming from across the courtyard. They did it again, Terrence said quietly. Jalen didn't hesitate. He marched to the side door, rattled the handle, then took 3 steps back, and with one swift kick, he broke it open. Inside, alarms blared faintly. Jalen and Terrence stepped into the lab, hearts pounding. The chalkboard was still warm. Across it were partial equations, unfinished, hurried, almost like someone had tried to copy them and then left in a rush. Jalen snapped photos of everything. Then he turned to Terrence. "You're not invisible anymore. They can't erase what we post." Terrence exhaled slowly, still stunned. "You really just kicked down a door." "They locked you out of your own mind," Jalen said. "Someone had to." Just as they turned to leave, a soft rustling echoed behind one of the cabinets. Jalen reached for his phone flashlight and peered into the dark corner. There, hunched and trembling, was a freshman, a white girl in a lab coat. Her voice shook. I copied his notes. I didn't know. They told me it was a group project. I think they're trying to publish it under someone else's name." Terrence stared. Another theft was already in motion, and this time they were using students to do it. The footage of Jalen kicking down the lab door didn't just go viral, it became a symbol. Within hours, news outlets from coast to coast were replaying the video with dramatic overlays. "Student exposes academic racism. Again." Ivory Dale, the return of eraser. From Langston to Miles. Why is brilliance only believed when it's white? The internet lit up. Scientists, students, educators, celebrities, all asked the same question. How many more are hidden behind mops and maintenance uniforms? But the final blow came when the hidden freshman girl, Addison Green, released her full testimony. On a live stream, through tears, she said, "They gave me a draft of Terrence's work. Told me to type it up, said it was part of a departmental research effort. I thought I was helping, then I found the original chalkboards, and realized I was part of the theft." The dominoes fell fast after that. A congressional committee convened within weeks. The pressure from Maurice's case, paired with this fresh scandal, was too much to ignore. National media dubbed it the Langston effect. Subpoenas were issued to academic boards across the country. Within 2 months, the U.S. Department of Education announced the creation of a federal task force on racial bias in STEM academia, with one clear mission: to investigate how Black intellectual labor had been systemically undervalued, uncredited, or stolen in major institutions. Maurice Langston was offered a seat on the advisory board. He declined. Instead, he nominated Jalen. "They need someone still fighting from the inside," he said, "not someone who barely escaped." Ivydale University couldn't outrun the storm. Protesters reappeared. Alumni pulled funding. Prestigious partners backed out of collaborative projects. Under mounting pressure, the university president, who had remained eerily silent during both the Langston and Miles scandals, resigned in disgrace. A leaked internal memo revealed that not only had she been aware of faculty misconduct, but she had also authorized hush payments to prevent lawsuits from earlier racial discrimination cases dating back 2 decades. The rod had been deeper than anyone thought. And then came the reckoning no one expected. Dr. Sebastian Klein was found. U.S. Marshals, acting on a tip, located him living under a false identity, in rural Utah. He had altered his appearance, changed his name, and was living in a small rented cabin under the alias Greg Stern. The tipster? A former research assistant, who'd recognized his voice in a podcast interview and compared it to a university archive recording. Klein was extradited back to the state, booked under charges of intellectual property theft, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. In court, he pled not guilty, but the evidence was insurmountable. The emails, the ghostwriting trails, the timestamps on Maurice's original papers. And now, Miles's equations, eerily matching fragments Klein had attempted to publish under a new grant proposal sent from his fake name. The jury took less than 3 hours. Guilty. Klein was sentenced to 12 years without parole. Maurice didn't attend the sentencing, but Jalen did, and when the verdict was read, he didn't cheer. He just sat quietly, holding a folded piece of chalk in his hand. Months passed. Slowly, the world started to change. Ivydale launched an official Langston Miles initiative, a hollow, rushed attempt to repair its reputation. They promised scholarships, public acknowledgments, new oversight committees, but real change came elsewhere. At MIT, Maurice's new lab tripled in size. He hired 5 new researchers, 3 of them Black, 2 of them women. He refused to call it affirmative action. He called it course correction. Terrence, after initially declining interviews, began speaking at national physics summits. His first paper, Event Horizon Modeling Without Formal Infrastructure, won him a spot on a NASA research grant team. And Jalen? He published a book titled Proof and Prejudice: Why Black Genius is Always Put on Trial. It became a bestseller in its first week. Then came the call from Time magazine. They wanted a cover story, a feature, something to mark the moment. Not just about equations, but about everything they meant. 3 men, 3 journeys. 1 war fought through whiteboards, shame, and silent rooms. The photo shoot was quiet. No flashy suits. No dramatic poses. Just Maurice, Jalen, and Terrence seated on a single bench, holding chalk in front of a wall filled with equations. No titles beneath their names. No degrees. Just this caption.
They solved more than math.
They solved a lie. When the magazine hit newsstands, it sold out within 40. The image went viral. School districts used it in curriculum slides. University ethics courses broke it down in lectures. Black students hung it on dorm room walls. White students wrote essays about it, acknowledging sometimes for the first time how invisible their classmates' pain had been. But the most important place it appeared wasn't a lecture hall or a lab. It was a living room in Compton, California. On a battered couch with the TV casting soft light across the room, sat a 10-year-old black girl named Malia. Her hair was braided tight. Her backpack sat by the door, filled with half-done homework and snack wrappers. She didn't say much as the segment ran. Just watched. Quiet. Still. Her eyes followed Maurice as he explained how he once read physics books by flashlight in a supply closet. Followed Terrence as he described dreaming of galaxies while sweeping dusty halls. Listened as Jalen said, "The world won't always believe you, so you have to believe louder." When the screen faded to commercial, Malia stood. She walked across the room to the shelf, past the coloring books, past the magazines, and picked up something she hadn't touched in months. A weathered physics textbook, left behind by her older cousin before he joined the army. She opened it to the first page and began to read. They tried to silence brilliance. They erased names, locked doors, and rewrote credit, but truth doesn't stay buried forever. If you believe it's time the world stopped deciding worth by skin color, type yes. If you believe in justice, subscribe. If this broke your heart,